The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves as I stepped into the cemetery parking lot. I held my coat tighter around me, feeling the cool breeze brush against my skin, and tried to steady my thoughts. Even in this quiet suburb of Houston, there was an odd tension, the kind that weighs heavier than the chill of the day. The casket, polished dark oak, gleamed under the pale sun, adorned with white lilies and roses that made the loss feel almost tangible. I took a slow breath, noticing my father's old friends murmuring quietly among themselves, their faces etched with sorrow and respect. Everything seemed perfectly arranged, almost too perfect, yet the air felt thick with unsaid words and hidden judgments. I spotted Giselle first, as I always did. She had that polished, effortless appearance, perfectly coiffed hair and a sharp dress that commanded attention. Her smile, cold and practiced, barely reached her eyes, but she nodded at me in a way that was polite yet filled with underlying contempt. I recognized it immediately, the subtle tilt of her head, the way she lingered just long enough to assert her presence without having to speak. My pulse quickened, not out of fear, but anticipation. I knew Giselle, I understood her games, and this moment, under the eyes of our extended family, was just another stage she intended to dominate. I stepped closer to the casket, glancing down at my father's face one last time. The memories flooded back, Saturday mornings he spent teaching me how to tie my shoes properly, the quiet advice about how to carry myself in a world that often underestimated women, the steady voice that reminded me, always observe before you act, Lily. I clutched the small coffee thermos he had gifted me last year, the handwritten note still tucked beneath its lid, "Don't forget to breathe, Dad." A tiny anchor of comfort, a tether to calm in the storm of my mind. The grief was heavy, but beneath it simmered a quiet determination: I would not be erased, not today, not ever. Family members gathered in small clusters. My mother's presence was almost spectral, poised and composed, a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. Cousins whispered among themselves, sharing condolences but throwing subtle glances toward me and Giselle. Each expression, each movement, was a puzzle piece I filed away. Who was sincere, who was swayed by appearances, who might be influenced by Giselle's polished whispers? I noted these things silently, analyzing as I always did. Understanding people was a weapon in itself, especially when one is underestimated. And then Giselle spoke. Her voice, soft yet cutting, drew the attention of everyone nearby. "I sometimes wonder why Dad bothered including some people," she said, her tone casual, almost playful, yet loaded with venom. I froze internally, feeling the sting of her words, the public humiliation she aimed at me with precision. My cheeks warmed, my heart pounded, but I held my posture steady, arms folded loosely in front of me, maintaining the calm exterior that my father had always admired. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Before I could respond, Giselle escalated, leaning slightly toward the gathered relatives. "And, of course, there's the question of whether Lily is truly Dad's biological daughter. You never know with some families." A gasp traveled through the small assembly, murmurs spreading like a ripple across the crowd. I felt my stomach drop, disbelief clawing at me. How could she say such a thing, here, now, in front of everyone? My mind raced, remembering the private assurances from Dad over the years, the quiet, firm statements that had always affirmed our bond. Yet, the audacity of Giselle's words made the ground beneath me feel suddenly unsteady. I noticed the banker standing unobtrusively at the edge of the group, his hands folded in front of him. He seemed aware of the tension but remained silent, a silent sentinel whose presence hinted at information yet unrevealed. I filed him away mentally, noting his watchful eyes, understanding instinctively that he might hold a key to the truths I had yet to uncover. The first surge of clarity amid the chaos, observation was as crucial as any rebuttal I might muster. My thoughts spun between outrage and strategy. Reacting impulsively here would play into Giselle's hands, she thrived on spectacle. Instead, I focused on my internal anchor, my father's thermos, the note he left me, a reminder to breathe, to ground myself. I allowed a flicker of hurt, a whisper of embarrassment, but I did not allow it to dominate. The simmering anger coiled within me, a restrained but potent force, waiting for its moment to assert itself. Family members' faces revealed their leanings, some sympathetic, others clearly swept along by Giselle's insinuations. I observed each flicker of doubt, each raised eyebrow, and began piecing together a map of loyalties, potential alliances, and vulnerabilities. My intelligence, my patience, and my resilience were my shields now. I realized that composure would be my instrument, that quiet observation could be sharper than any retort in this charged moment. Giselle's final jab came as the ceremony seemed to stretch interminably, her words laced with insinuation regarding inheritance and exclusion. "Let's just hope everyone knows their place," she said, a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. That was the spark. I felt a surge of anger, yes, but it was tempered by the clarity of purpose. The realization struck me, passive endurance would no longer suffice. If I did not act, if I did not observe and understand every nuance, my place within this family could be silently erased, just as she had implied. I clenched my thermos tighter, drawing in a steadying breath. The grief, the shock, and the subtle betrayals around me sharpened my resolve. I would uncover the truth, protect my standing, and honor my father's legacy. No words were spoken as I promised myself this silently, a vow more binding than any spoken contract. The banker's quiet presence, the polished deception of Giselle, the undercurrents of family politics, they all became part of the puzzle I was now determined to solve. The air felt heavier that morning, overcast clouds blotting out the sun as if the sky itself understood the tension lingering over the cemetery. I followed the murmuring crowd, keeping my eyes forward, yet constantly aware of Giselle's poised figure moving with that same smug confidence, as if she owned the space. Every step I took toward the center where the family gathered was measured, deliberate. I reminded myself to breathe, gripping the small thermos Dad had left me, the note tucked inside still a quiet, steadfast anchor. Today, composure was as essential as my own heartbeat. Any sign of faltering could give Giselle the upper hand before the lawyer even spoke. Mr. Holbrook arrived quietly, but the presence he carried shifted the atmosphere. His calm authority drew every eye, including Giselle's, who blinked in a subtle, unguarded moment before rearranging her expression into the practiced smile I knew too well. I noticed how he carried himself, measured steps, slight nods to aunts and cousins, commanding respect without needing to raise his voice. Sterling anticipated this scenario, he said softly, almost to himself, yet loud enough that our family instinctively leaned in. A stir ran through the gathering, curiosity, apprehension, a mingling of dread and hope. I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the need to observe, to gauge each subtle shift in expression. This was my first test, to absorb the scene without betraying the storm inside me. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope, the paper slightly creased from careful handling, the handwriting unmistakably my father's. Giselle's eyes flicked to it, a hint of surprise masked behind her polished facade. She straightened, lips tightening, trying to keep her reaction measured, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty. The envelope was more than just paper, it was a key, a carefully planned maneuver from Dad, a posthumous strategy that I was only beginning to comprehend. My fingers itched to reach for it, but I remained still, noting every detail, the official seal, the neatness of the folds, the faint scent of ink and wax, a tactile memory of my father's precision. Opportunity glimmered in that moment, subtle yet potent, and I prepared myself mentally to respond not with emotion alone, but with strategic awareness. The lawyer opened the envelope and began reading aloud, his voice steady yet resonant. Each word from Dad's pen affirmed my place in the family. He had explicitly written that I was, without question, his true daughter. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Gasps mingled with murmurs as relatives exchanged glances, reevaluating what they had assumed moments before. Giselle's composure faltered in ways she tried to hide, a slight narrowing of her eyes, a hand clenching the edge of her coat. I felt a warm surge, vindication flooding the edges of my shock. Memories of Dad's guidance, his quiet affirmations, came back to me, him telling me I could handle whatever life threw my way, that patience and observation were my allies. I clutched the thermos tighter, drawing in a steadying breath as clarity mingled with relief. I was not imagined, not a mistake, not subject to her manipulations. I observed the family as the words sank in. Faces softened, others shifted subtly, allegiance recalibrating. Aunt Martha's eyes lingered on me with gentle approval, Uncle James's posture relaxed. Cousins whispered among themselves, cautious but intrigued, evaluating Giselle's faltering confidence. The banker, Mr. Hayden, remained discreetly at the edge, his posture reserved, hands folded in front. I noted his presence and the way his gaze lingered, understanding intuitively that he carried knowledge not yet revealed, another piece of the puzzle I would need. The weight of strategy pressed on me, each glance, each reaction, a data point to be stored, assessed, and later acted upon. I allowed myself a quiet internal smile, careful not to betray too much. Giselle's thin mask of control was cracking, yet I remained measured. There was no need for overt confrontation yet, the power lay in observation, in timing. I considered the next steps carefully. What would I say, when, and to whom? My father's lessons played over in my mind, patience first, then precision. Emotional restraint was not weakness, it was preparation. I would not let her manipulate me further, not now, not ever. My resolve strengthened as I catalogued subtle inconsistencies in her prior claims, little slips that I would remember when the time came for a more decisive engagement. As the reading concluded, Mr. Holbrook folded the letter back into its envelope with deliberate care. He paused, a hint of something in his expression signaling more to come, additional proof, a secondary revelation that would further secure my position. I felt the surge of anticipation, the electricity of suspense mingling with relief. Giselle's rigid posture, the tight set of her jaw, betrayed that she sensed the next blow might land beyond her control. I held the thermos close, feeling its warmth seep into my hands, a symbolic connection to Dad, and with it, a rising clarity. The pivotal moment was approaching, and I would meet it armed with observation, composure, and strategy. After the lawyer finished reading the letter, the hum of whispers and shifting feet followed us into the small reception room behind the cemetery chapel. The air still carried a chill, but there was a different weight now, one laced with curiosity and barely contained tension. Mr. Hayden, the banker, had remained near the periphery, his calm presence almost imperceptible until he inclined his head slightly in my direction. The subtle gesture was deliberate, signaling I should come aside. Giselle's eyes followed every step I took, a flicker of curiosity and unease betraying the mask she fought to maintain. We moved a few paces away from the family, and his voice lowered into a near whisper. "Miss Lily," he began, careful with his words, "your father left certain assets in your name. A key account, one that contains the bulk of his estate." I froze briefly, disbelief mingling with a surge of hope so sharp it made my chest tighten. Every detail I had absorbed from Dad's careful planning fell into place. The years of patience, the quiet counsel in his handwritten notes, the lessons in observation, they were all threads woven into this moment. I nodded slowly, trying to anchor my composure even as my mind raced, already forming strategies for how and when to reveal this to the rest of the family. Mr. Hayden's eyes were steady, patient, inviting me to absorb the gravity without panic. He explained that the account had been deliberately maintained in my name, with oversight instructions that ensured only I could access or authorize its use. Giselle's carefully constructed composure began to tremble, her fingers tightening around the edge of a chair for support, lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, I felt a tangible sense of empowerment, an undeniable proof that no one could dispute. It was more than financial security, it was validation of my place in the family, recognition of a lifetime of being overlooked yet quietly resilient. We returned to the circle of relatives, Mr. Hayden subtly moving back into the background, allowing me the moment to process and observe the family's reactions. The lawyer interjected at just the right moment, reinforcing the intent behind my father's decisions. "Sterling always knew who he trusted," he said, glancing at Giselle with understated weight. Murmurs spread through the room, some voices tentative, others surprised, reflecting the shifting alliances. I noted micro-expressions with precision, a cousin's slight hesitation, an aunt's cautious nod, the subtle exchange of glances between my uncle and Giselle. Each glance, each movement became data, building the narrative I would use when the time for confrontation arrived. Alone in my own thoughts, I replayed memories of past dismissals and subtle snubs, contrasting them with this revelation. The indignation simmered, tempered by a clear sense of direction. I thought about how to present the facts with measured calm, ensuring my strategic advantage while keeping emotions in check. Dad's voice echoed in my mind, "Patience is the silent weapon." I mapped out each relative's probable reaction, imagining Giselle's attempts to deflect or manipulate and planning how I would respond. For the first time that day, the tide felt as though it had shifted irrevocably in my favor. I caught a subtle nod from Mr. Hayden, a gesture almost imperceptible, but one that reinforced the sense that the next steps would require precision and patience. Giselle's voice was cracking further, every forced smile betraying the panic I sensed simmering beneath. I observed family members' body language, noting who would likely support me and who might side with her. It was a delicate chessboard, and every piece was in motion. The opportunity to assert my rightful claim was closer than ever, yet I knew the full battle had just begun. A thrill mingled with anticipation, controlled, deliberate, measured. Then the banker leaned in, his voice low, carrying just enough weight to draw immediate attention. "This is only the beginning. Your father left everything to you, but not everyone knows yet." The words landed like stones, echoing silently across the room. Heads turned, eyes widened, and I felt the first real surge of adrenaline paired with a keen sense of readiness. The air crackled with expectation, the kind that precedes a storm, and I understood instinctively, the moment for strategic action was fast approaching. Every lesson, every past humiliation, every hidden slight was now fuel for clarity, purpose, and measured confrontation. I took a deep breath, steadying my pulse, my mind already cataloging the steps to ensure that when the next revelation came, I would be prepared to claim what was always rightfully mine. The murmurs hadn't quite died down when Mr. Holbrook cleared his throat, a soft, deliberate sound that instantly commanded attention without theatrics. I felt my pulse quicken, a subtle awareness settling over me as I read the room. Giselle's posture stiffened, her fingers fidgeting at the edge of her purse, a barely noticeable tremor in her otherwise polished facade. Everyone's gaze shifted toward the lawyer, the air thick with anticipation. Even the overcast light spilling through the side windows seemed to pause, as if the day itself held its breath. I tightened my grip on the small keepsake in my coat pocket, the token from Dad grounding me, reminding me to stay calm and observant. Mr. Holbrook lifted a compact case from the table and opened it carefully, producing several small audio devices. "These were left by Sterling for specific circumstances," he said, his voice calm yet imbued with gravity. My stomach lurched, a mix of suspense and anxiety coiling inside me. As the first recording played, I recognized Dad's voice immediately, familiar, warm, but firm, addressing matters only meant for me. My chest tightened, disbelief flickering into vindication. Giselle's lips parted slightly, a gasp she attempted to swallow, eyes darting as her composure threatened to crumble. I could see her panic even in the half-second she tried to mask it with an indifferent glance. The voices of family members swirled around me in whispers, each processing the revelation in their own way. Some faces showed shock, others guilt, and a few shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure of where their loyalties now lay. My mind catalogued each expression, every subtle microreaction, each pause or gulp, data I would store for later. The recordings confirmed what Dad had tried to assure me over the years: I was his daughter in every sense that mattered, recognized and intended to inherit what was rightfully mine. Relief and pride mingled, yet I maintained outward composure, mindful that this was just the first wave of a larger confrontation. I allowed myself a brief moment to reflect internally, assessing how the family might respond next. Timing, I reminded myself, was everything. Dad's voice echoed in my thoughts: "Timing is power." I began strategizing, considering the potential supporters and those likely to resist, crafting silent plans for when the revelations went public. My heart raced not from fear, but from calculated anticipation. This was no longer just a private grievance, it was a moment of empowerment, a turning point in how the family dynamics could unfold. Giselle, sensing her authority slipping, attempted verbal deflection. She spoke lightly, downplaying the significance of the recordings, even as her tone carried subtle, pointed threats. Some relatives shifted uneasily, whispering, uncertain whether to side with her or observe quietly. I noted every weakness, every inconsistency, mentally marking opportunities to exploit her defensive maneuvers later. Beneath the restraint of my exterior, a quiet triumph flickered, Control was slowly returning to me, anchored by the undeniable proof Dad had left behind. The lawyer didn't rush, his measured pace amplifying the suspense. He hinted at additional documentation, still withheld, ensuring everyone felt the weight of incomplete knowledge. My mind catalogued the clues, calculating the exact moment to assert my position. Observing the shifting faces of the family, I recognized the subtle questioning of prior assumptions, inheritance, loyalty, honesty, starting to take root. A sense of moral satisfaction intertwined with suspense, each revelation pushing me closer to the confrontation I had prepared for in silence. Finally, Mr. Holbrook paused, letting the weight of the recordings hang in the air. He looked directly at me and said, "There's more to hear, but first, Lily, you must decide how to act." My pulse thrummed in my ears, awareness sharpening to a razor's edge. Every prior slight, every whispered insult, every subtle dismissal now fueled a clarity I had never known before. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the first genuine sense of readiness to step forward, to confront Giselle and the family with undeniable evidence. The moment had arrived where patience and strategy would intersect with action, and I was ready. I stood near the edge of the reception hall, scanning the room as my mind raced. Family members clustered in small groups, their conversations hushed but loaded with curiosity. Aunt Marlene's eyes flicked toward me every few seconds, as though silently weighing my place among them, while Uncle Paul's furrowed brow suggested cautious observation. I caught Giselle's sharp gaze, the tension in her shoulders betraying the calm mask she tried to maintain. Subtle nods from Mr. Hayden reassured me that I wasn't alone. He stood a few steps back, watching but not interfering, a quiet ally in this delicate balance of power. Every glance, every shifted weight, every whispered murmur was data to analyze, and I absorbed it all. My pulse steadied as I reminded myself, patience and timing were as critical as the evidence in my hands. I would not let her rattle me, not now. Giselle's voice finally cut through the murmurs, sharp and polished, yet unmistakably aimed to provoke. "Lily, perhaps you should tell everyone again how useless you've been, or are you even really our father's daughter?" Her words hung in the air, met with a mix of gasps and suppressed whispers from the room. My stomach clenched, a familiar flash of indignation sparking, but I held myself rigid, eyes locked on her. I felt the familiar surge of controlled anger, the kind that sharpened your mind instead of clouding it. I let the moment settle, gauging the reactions of the onlookers, noting those who seemed shocked, those who chuckled nervously, and those who stayed silent, likely unsure how to respond. Giselle's veneer of composure wavered under the scrutiny, and I knew the tide was beginning to turn. Drawing on the calm assurance the recordings and documents had given me, I allowed my mind to play out the next steps. I would not shout or confront recklessly. Instead, I prepared to reveal the truth strategically, letting the evidence speak. Every pause, every deliberate breath was part of the plan. I could feel the weight of the room pressing against Giselle's posture, the subtle stiffening of her arms, the slight narrowing of her eyes. My heart swelled, not with pride for victory yet, but with the measured satisfaction of control. I let a faint smile play at the corner of my lips, invisible perhaps to many, but a silent signal of resolve and empowerment. Then Mr. Hayden approached, leaning close enough for only me to hear, his voice low and measured. "The account is legally yours, Lily," he whispered, his words crisp, undeniable. I felt a quiet thrill surge through me, the truth of it grounding every plan and thought I had formed. Giselle's expression faltered, a split second of panic flashing across her face before she masked it with a shaky smile. The shift in power was tangible, almost electric. Whispers began to ripple through the reception, family members gradually understanding the implications. The room felt smaller, charged with unspoken acknowledgement of what had been hidden in plain sight for so long. I allowed myself a private moment of satisfaction, internalizing the moral victory without fanfare. I didn't need applause or acknowledgement, I knew the justice served itself, quietly and firmly. My eyes scanned the room again, noting reactions, observing alliances forming subtly among cousins, aunts, and uncles. Giselle's previous arrogance had met its first true challenge, and I could see the cracks beginning to form in her carefully maintained facade. The thrill was tempered by caution. I knew this was not the end. There were still conversations to navigate, whispers to interpret, and truths to assert. As the hall buzzed with tentative realization, I felt a steady surge of controlled anticipation. More proof, more revelation, these would come, and I would meet them with the clarity and strategy I had honed over years of observing and learning. I straightened my shoulders, taking in the murmurs around me, and felt a profound sense of readiness. The moment had passed from mere reaction to deliberate action, and I was prepared to step fully into it, knowing that standing my ground meant more than defending a title, it meant asserting the truth, no matter who resisted. The hum of whispered conversations filled the reception hall as I stood just outside the study room, letting the weight of the banker's words settle in my mind. The legal ownership of the account was mine, a quiet affirmation that resonated deeper than any argument could. I watched Giselle pacing, hands fidgeting with her napkin, the tension in her posture unmistakable. Family members exchanged glances, a subtle social pressure mounting in her direction, as though the walls themselves had become witnesses to her unraveling. I allowed myself a slow, steadying breath, knowing that the momentum was mine to guide. Observation, patience, and measured action, this was my domain now, and every micro-expression, every murmur, was a clue to anticipate the next move. Giselle, sensing the narrowing gap between our positions, struck next. Her voice cut through the low buzz of the room, precise and laced with forced authority. "You think you understand the family legacy, Lily? All your contributions are negligible," she said, her tone intended to undermine, to provoke a reaction. The hall's attention shifted, a few relatives raised eyebrows in surprise, some exchanged subtle nods toward me. I felt the simmering anger, but it was tempered with sharp clarity. I observed, not reacted. I noted every word, every inflection, every tremor of insecurity, each a piece of evidence, each an opportunity to respond not with emotion, but with precision. With calm determination, I began my subtle retaliation. I corrected misconceptions with factual precision, citing past contributions and memories of my father's instructions, doing so quietly but firmly. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice, just quiet clarity that carried weight. Giselle's attempt to belittle me backfired as I exposed inconsistencies in her narrative with pointed, irrefutable statements. I watched as her carefully constructed facade wavered, the first cracks forming in the wall of confidence she relied upon. Each subtle acknowledgement from family members reinforced my position. I felt a pulse of empowerment, a quiet triumph not meant for applause, but deeply satisfying in its unspoken justice. Then came the unexpected revelation, a minor, yet telling detail that I had held in reserve. I mentioned a forgotten ledger and a note from my father, a small yet pivotal piece that highlighted the depth of my involvement and understanding of the family's affairs. Giselle froze, her words faltering as eyes in the room widened in recognition. The subtle shift was palpable, whispers rose as family members began to see the truth more clearly. The power dynamic was tilting, the tension from her previous bravado now replaced with cautious observation. I could feel the room recalibrating around this new acknowledgement, the energy charged with the quiet shock of realization. I took a moment to reflect internally, grounding myself in the satisfaction of maintaining dignity while asserting my rightful position. I catalogued the reactions, assessing which family members were likely to support me, which remained uncertain, and which would require further demonstration of my competence. My thoughts turned to the next steps, anticipating that Giselle would not concede easily, and preparing strategies for future engagement. The moral satisfaction of handling the confrontation with poise brought a calm certainty, tempered by the awareness that vigilance and careful planning remained essential. As the evening progressed, the reception hall continued its subtle symphony of murmurs and sideways glances. I sensed that Giselle's frustration was growing, her patience thinning. The battle was far from over, yet I had established the momentum and the upper hand. The awareness of impending moves, the quiet calculation of timing and strategy, filled me with a controlled excitement. Every subtle gesture, every word, every reaction was being catalogued, stored, and prepared for the inevitable escalation. The game had shifted, silent, methodical, and entirely in my favor, but it was only the beginning. The path ahead promised more revelations, and I was ready to meet them with the same calm precision. The living room felt smaller than usual, as if the weight of unspoken truths pressed against the walls. I moved deliberately, observing Giselle with a calmness she hadn't seen in me before. Every subtle twitch, every tight jawline and fleeting glance she offered betrayed a panic she was trying so desperately to hide. I quietly gathered the documents I had retained, the letters, the receipts, the proofs of involvement that traced back through years of careful diligence. Each piece was a thread, and I was beginning to weave them into a pattern she could no longer ignore. My pulse was steady, my mind focused. I could feel the shift happening, the leverage I had quietly collected slipping into place, and the realization brought a silent thrill. Giselle was losing her grip, and I was just awakening to the full measure of opportunity before me. I began my silent strategic moves, not in a showy display, but in calculated gestures and well-placed comments. A mention here of an account reconciled, a subtle correction of an overlooked detail there, each statement nudging the narrative closer to truth without ruffling overtly. Family members began to take note, catching fragments of clarity that undermined the stories Giselle had tried to weave around me. Some cousins, long feeling overshadowed, leaned subtly toward me, small glances of recognition passing between us. I allowed the room to absorb these shifts, letting the quiet satisfaction of intelligent, measured maneuvering settle in my chest. This was power exercised without noise, yet it resonated louder than any accusation. In the midst of this, I allowed myself a moment of emotional reckoning. Past resentments surfaced, not bitterly, but with a sense of finality. I reframed my narrative in the quiet of my own mind. Every slight, every dismissal, every belittling remark became a reminder of patience and careful observation, rather than fuel for rash confrontation. My calm intelligence was my advantage. I could see it reflected in the shifting demeanor of the family, the subtle tightening of Giselle's expressions, the faint glimmer of doubt appearing where certainty had once resided. My empowerment felt measured, moral, and true. I knew the upper hand was no longer theoretical, it was tangible, quietly acknowledged by those around me. The quiet confrontation with Giselle began in earnest, though no words were raised in anger. A hint here, a knowing glance there, small acknowledgments of facts only I could know. Her eyes flickered, her confident poise faltering under the weight of subtle truths laid bare without a sound. The family noticed, curiosity mingling with surprise. I felt the room tighten, the energy sharpen, as the tide of perception began to shift in my favor. Giselle's usual control was eroding, and with each unspoken revelation, my resolve strengthened. I didn't need to raise my voice, the truth carried itself, and the effect was unmistakable. As the evening shadows lengthened across the estate, I mentally calibrated for the climax to come. I reviewed my approach, considering timing and placement, aware that the final decisive moments were within reach. The lessons of patience and observation that my father had impressed upon me guided my thought, steadying my mind against the anticipation that bubbled beneath the surface. Each moment was a step toward clarity, each reaction a piece of the puzzle I would complete when the time was right. I felt the confidence of someone who had measured the terrain and knew precisely when to act, the kind of composure that turned tension into opportunity. Family members sensed a revelation approaching. Giselle's unease was palpable, her mask slipping. Every eye in the room flicked between us, aware that the dynamics had changed, that a major shift was imminent. I felt the quiet pulse of power, the rhythm of strategic awakening as the pieces aligned. The moment to claim justice, to unveil truth and confront the final layer of deception, was drawing near. I could almost see the path, illuminated by careful planning and unspoken observation. And I knew that when I moved, it would be decisive. The tables were turning. The evening air felt heavier inside the estate, shadows stretching along the walls as if waiting for what was to come. I stood at the head of the dining table, carefully aligning the documents and recordings before me. Every glance from the family carried anticipation, their murmurs filling the otherwise quiet room. I waited, letting the tension build, measuring exactly when to speak. The moment was ripe. Giselle fidgeted slightly, her poised mask cracking ever so subtly. Slowly, deliberately, I began to reveal the evidence. Each paper I presented, each recording I played, disproved her claims about my parentage. Gasps and stifled whispers rippled through the room as faces turned from disbelief to shock. I felt a calm satisfaction settling over me, a quiet vindication for years of patience and silent observation. Every reaction, Every raised eyebrow and tightened lip confirmed the truth was now undeniable. I lifted my gaze and addressed the room directly, my voice calm and authoritative. "She owns the account," I said, nodding toward Mr. Hayden, who confirmed with a subtle nod, the quiet weight of proof lending me undeniable authority. Giselle attempted to counter, but her words stumbled against the weight of evidence. Murmurs of understanding spread among the guests, some nodding in recognition of what had been hidden too long. The exhilaration was subtle but intense. Justice was being observed in real time. Every eye on me reinforced the sense that the balance had shifted irrevocably. I could sense admiration mingling with disbelief. The moral weight of the moment was tangible, each heartbeat echoing with a quiet triumph. I pressed forward strategically, using pointed questions and references to legal documents to expose gaps in Giselle's defenses. Her composure wavered with each query, subtle signs of panic flickering across her face. The family began to reconsider previous assumptions, noticing the cracks in the story she had crafted over time. Mr. Hillbrook's quiet commentary supported my position, framing the revelations in a professional, measured way that left little room for argument. I watched, cataloging reactions, understanding which allies were emerging and which doubts had taken root. Each micro-expression, each hesitant glance was a signal I absorbed, preparing for the next stage. The room shifted imperceptibly, aligning more with reality than the false narrative Giselle had held so tightly. Then, the final layer surfaced. Hidden alliances and subtle collusions that had been overlooked until now were exposed. Minor family conspiracies, previously invisible, became clear as I presented facts in a calm, deliberate manner. Mr. Hayden confirmed the legitimacy of the accounts, underscoring the extent of my father's intentions. Shock rippled through the family. Giselle and her supporters faltered, realizing that their carefully constructed control was unraveling. The power dynamic shifted before everyone's eyes, a quiet recognition settling over the room that the truth could no longer be denied. It was both empowering and morally satisfying, seeing justice revealed without spectacle, relying only on patience, intellect, and deliberate action. As the evening wound on, I reflected quietly. The journey had been long, marked by careful observation, strategic planning, and a steady resolve to rise above manipulation and deceit. Giselle's subtle remorse and defensiveness spoke volumes. The family faced a moral reckoning they couldn't ignore. I felt the weight of personal growth, the clarity that came from asserting truth with dignity. Every calculated move, every silent correction, had brought me to this point. There was still room for reconciliation, though it would need to be approached cautiously. The lesson of patience had borne fruit, and I was ready for whatever remained to be done. With the truth finally exposed, I positioned myself for the final act. I could feel the room's energy tighten as all attention turned toward the closing moves of this long, measured confrontation. The family waited, the air charged with expectation, and I stood poised, ready to navigate the aftermath, ensuring that justice, recognition, and emotional closure would follow. The reckoning had begun, and the stage was set for resolution. Morning light poured through the tall windows of the family estate, casting a warm glow across the main hall. After the reckoning of the previous evening, the atmosphere had shifted. Family members moved with cautious awareness, conversations tinged with reflection rather than confrontation. Giselle stood quietly, her previous arrogance softened by the undeniable truths revealed. I watched her, noting both the subtle remorse and the defensiveness that lingered. Mr. Hillbrook and Mr. Hayden quietly moved among the group, ensuring clarity in the legal and financial matters that had been contested. The weight of rightful ownership was now formalized, and the misunderstandings that had fueled tension were clarified. The family's alliances shifted subtly, some faces softened in acknowledgement, others contemplative in the moral reckoning they had just witnessed. Relief settled in my chest, tempered by cautious optimism for what would come next. I took a deep breath and approached my immediate family, speaking calmly and deliberately. The words were measured, aimed at understanding rather than retribution. "We've all seen what needed to be revealed," I said. "It's time to move forward, honestly, and with respect." Giselle responded quietly, a simple acknowledgement that carried more weight than any dramatic apology could have. I reflected internally on how far I had come, on the patience, strategy, and intelligence it had required to navigate this conflict. Every decision, every observation, Every silent correction had brought me here. I felt the quiet empowerment of maintaining dignity while asserting truth, the moral satisfaction of righting years of imbalance. Boundaries were clear, respect re-established, and the room began to feel lighter, more settled, yet mindful of the lessons etched in each interaction. Later, I met with Mr. Hayden and Mr. Holbrook to finalize the remaining financial and legal matters. The banker confirmed the account ownership that had been contested, solidifying my claim without further dispute. Mr. Holbrook documented all agreements, validating that every legal aspect aligned with the truth in my father's intentions. I ensured fairness throughout, demonstrating moral high ground even as clarity and authority now rested firmly with me. There was a quiet triumph in watching everything fall into its rightful place, the lingering uncertainty replaced by verified security. Each signature, each acknowledgement from family, carried a sense of completion that extended beyond paperwork. It reinforced justice and restored integrity. I reflected further on the lessons this journey had imparted. Patience had been my tool, observation my ally, and the courage to stand firm my shield. The family, collectively, had experienced a moral reckoning. Honesty, respect, and accountability now carried visible weight in our relationships. I internalized the empowerment this brought, understanding that while the past had shaped me, it no longer dictated my choices or my standing. Subtle traces of tension remained, natural echoes of the challenges endured, yet they served as reminders of strength gained and resilience proven. The estate, once a stage for discord, now seemed to echo potential for genuine connection and careful reconciliation. As I stepped outside into the sunlight, the warmth on my face mirrored the clarity I felt inside. Every confrontation, every revelation, and every strategic choice had brought me to this moment. The past had left its marks, but they would not define me any longer. I walked forward with measured steps, the future open, my mind clear, and my heart steady. The estate behind me held the lessons of a lifetime, yet ahead lay the promise of a new chapter, one built on truth, strength, and the quiet power of integrity.